Tonight, we're going to hear some interesting stories shared from law enforcement personnel, first responders, and medical personnel, all who have had experiences with the paranormal, on this episode of Passion for the Paranormal. Okay, so my guest tonight is Gare Allen. And Gare is author of several books, several best-selling books, including Ghost Crimes, based on actual paranormal cases, The Dead, A True Paranormal Story, First Impressions, True Tales from the Road, A Family in Faith, as well as 7 lessons, 7 short stories of metaphysical and paranormal experiences. Gare is also a writer for theghostdiaries.com. He was born in 1969 in Tampa, Florida, where he currently resides. Years of metaphysical study resulted in the 7 lesson series he's written and the best-selling book, The Dead, A True Paranormal Story. Gare supports animal welfare organizations in his free time, and he is dedicated to physical fitness as well. So, Gare, thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight.
Well, thank you for having me, Curry. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, and it's quite a resume. You've written, I think you said now 15 books, so you're a busy guy. Where do you find the time to write all these books?
You mentioned I was born in 1969, so and I'll let the listeners do the math. But at this age, you start to forget things. And what happened with me was I started to I remembered things happening, but the details started to change, and I wanted to preserve them. So a lot of the experiences I had, I wanted to preserve those in a book. So that was really my motivation. But any time off, weekends, evenings, I spend my time writing, and I'm very detailed. I use an outline. So I'm not going to say they come together quickly, but I know the content, so I'm able to make use of the time that I have, to get the content down.
Sure. And I'm sure the more you do it, the easier it gets. Is that kind of the case?
Well, I'd like to say it's better. But I will say that despite the outlines, at least with my fictional work, the characters seem to take on their own lives and become and then it'll actually surprise me where they kind of go. But that's the fun in it too. But it's one of those things where when you're writing and you're sort of in the groove, 3 hours can go like that. And you're like, wow, I need to keep going. And so it's hard to turn off the imagination or the focus and then turn it right back on. So for me, I have to ease back into it. I have to, the dogs have to be fed. I have to have finished my workout. Everything's got to be good to go, and then I can, dedicate that time.
Sure. Yeah. So let's step back a little bit here and let's hear how this played out for you. Did you start having paranormal experiences at a young age? When did it all start for you?
So my first paranormal experience happened when I was 12 years old, and I had gone to bed, and my bedroom was at the top of the stairs. And I went to bed, and I had the family dog at the foot of the bed, and I hadn't even begun to fall asleep yet, and the bed literally just levitated, and it was probably a few inches off the ground. It wobbled, and then it fell back down with a thud. It was a very heavy wooden bed, and my dog jumped off the bed. My limbs moved in response to the bed, which kind of gave me confirmation that it had actually happened and I wasn't dreaming. And just then my older brother was coming up the stairs, and he kind of poked his head in the door, and he said, "What was that noise?" And I just didn't respond. I was probably white as a sheet. He probably chalked it up to another weird little brother moment and walked off. But I was frozen, and I had no idea what had caused it. And that was my first introduction to something else happening. And I always dreamt very, very vividly as a child. I still dream very vividly today. But I took that experience, and when I was in my mid-20s, on a whim, I turned into a plaza with a metaphysical bookstore, an academy, where they had workshops. And I don't know, I can't tell you why I turned in. I was heading home, but I turned right into the plaza. And then for the next 2 to 3 years, I spent so much time in workshops, studying, meditating, and reading every book I could get my hands on, focused mostly, metaphysical and paranormal phenomena.
Yeah, you said it, something just compelled you to kind of make that turn and go into the, the plaza, the bookshop. Do you feel like something did you feel like something was guiding you in that direction?
Yeah, I think so, because one of my first focuses, aside from reincarnation, was connecting with, your spirit guide, whether you want to call them your guardian angel, and I was obsessed with it. I couldn't wait to connect. And I'd worked retail management for many years up to that point, and it's such a humdrum job. You kind of wonder, there's got to be more to going to work, coming home, eating dinner, going to work, coming in. And I think I was in one of those places, and I was in my mid 20s, so I had no idea what I wanted to do, what the world was about. You're in that in between state, of school's over, but now you got to figure out, what your life is going to be. And it was so exciting to me that there was something more than the physical. And God forbid, I'm bored with the world. I'm not going to say I was bored with the world because I hadn't seen the world by any means. But I don't know. I gravitated towards something more, and like, I guess, a higher purpose. I guess in hindsight, I can look back and say, to think that I was in more control than I realized. I think I sort of looked at circumstances happening to me and like, oh, I didn't get that raise I wanted, I didn't get this job I wanted, I didn't get the date I wanted, et cetera. And you come to find out with that metaphysical and that spiritual teaching that you are very much in control of what happens to you. And I think that gave me some ownership that I desperately needed. But I was like a kid in a candy store. I mean, a light went off and I said, this makes sense. I hadn't gravitated to religion. There wasn't anything that really put me in a place of understanding of the totality of things outside of myself. And I think that's what metaphysics and the paranormal did and is still doing for me.
Now, Gare, did you have other family members that had paranormal experiences?
So no, my my father actually was in the Navy. Very left brain, analytical, grounded individual. My brothers are cut from the same cloth, and my mother the same way. Very grounded, people. They didn't talk about any kind of metaphysical experience until about 6 months before my mother passed. I had a conversation with her, and I went to her house. I had two conversations. I went to her house one day, and she was beside herself because she had woken up very early, and she looked out her window, and it was a half moon. And she said that there was this beautiful angel sitting on the moon just smiling at her. And she just stood there and smiled back for what seemed like an eternity. And then her cat ran against her leg and took her attention away. And when she looked away and looked back, the angel was gone. And my mother had never talked about any kind of ghosts or anything like that. She just wasn't that person. But she almost was pleading with me to believe her, and she kind of knew I would anyway. And unfortunately, I kind of saw that as a sign of her probably going to pass soon. That's often what happens, or people will report that, and then soon after they do pass, and 6 months later, my mother passed. But that sparked a conversation about dreams, and I said, because she thought she was dreaming at first, and I said, well, have you ever had any recurring dreams? And I asked her that because I've had so many. And she said, yeah. And she said she had this recurring dream where she was a little girl, and she was on a wagon, horse-drawn wagon, and there was a trail of settlers, and they were going through some state in the Midwest, and they had been attacked by Native Americans, and they were slaughtered. And in the dream, she kind of was hiding under a blanket, and she looked up, and there was a Native American, and he was on his horse, and he had the arrow pulled back, and he was about to release it. And she wakes up before he releases the arrow. And what I didn't share with her was that for years I had a dream of being that Native American on a horse staring at a little girl with an arrow pulled back, but I never released it, and I would wake up before I released it. And it just made perfect sense to me that it was a shared recollection of a past life that we had. And I was super close to my mother, super close. And so, but that's, as far as family goes, that was the only experiences or interest they had in the metaphysical or paranormal while they were alive.
Wow, that's some fascinating story. Uh, Talk about what was their reaction when you got involved and you went in this direction on your own.
you know I'm the middle child, and I've always been a little a little different. I mean, my mother is a free spirit. I'm a free spirit, and my brothers are very much like my father, a little more um, between the lines for sure. So I don't think they were surprised. they did read one or two of my books, which they're not readers. So the fact that they read it and gave me positive response, meant a lot to me. But now they're just, I'll get a text, are your books on Netflix yet? Is it a show yet? I'm like, no, not yet. So they're kind of like waiting for me to, kind of go to the next level, but they're very supportive. But yeah, they accept it and they're very positive about it, but they kind of keep, that arm's length. And I write about life, and a lot of my life has been metaphysics and paranormal. But I have a family in faith, and I have a Two's Company, Three's a Pack, where I talk about the rescue dogs. I have The Dead, which is just everything that happened to me from that bed levitating until 2014 when I wrote the book. So there's a lot of life in there too, and there's loss in there. And I wrote about the loss of my mother. It was a very traumatic experience for me. I was her caretaker at the end. So unfortunately, my brothers, will not read those books for obvious reasons.
Yeah, and I know that's Gary, I know that's a sensitive subject. I lost my mom last month to cancer.
Oh,
Actually 2 months ago, July now. Um,
I'm sorry.
You said there was a dream there you had with your mom. Any reoccurring dreams now since she's passed?
So two things happened, and it was I don't know. And for this was, I had a very strange reaction after the fact that I'll share. So what happened was, for the next year, I dreamt of my mother every other night, at least, and I could never see her eyes. And it was, and so we had no interaction, we had no conversation, but it was always in a different setting, and it was the strangest dream. And of course, to me, it was unsettling because I'm pretty good at deciphering the symbolism of my subconscious at this point. I've learned the language of the subconscious, or at least mine, and what the dreams mean, and kind of the feeling behind it. Well, I was too close to this. I couldn't be objective, so I had no idea what it meant. And it took a year for me to figure it out. And it dawned on me finally one day that after my mother had passed, we had gone home. And as we were pulling in the driveway, my younger brother got a call from the hospital. And I didn't hear what was said, but he kind of put the phone down, and he's like, it's the hospital. They want to harvest mom's eyes because she was an organ donor. And I thought, well, why are they asking then? But he just said yes. And once I remembered, they had donated her eyes, that they harvested her eyes, that, I didn't have the dream anymore. But I laughed because I remember my mother wore glasses, and she had the best sense of humor. And I could hear her saying, good luck to the person that gets my eyes. They're awful. What is this about? So I remember laughing about it. But I struggled with, since I was dreaming of my mother, is she passed? Is she not at peace? Is she hanging around? And is she safe? So all those things, I got turned around in my head. So I'm at the gym, and I'm talking to my workout partner, and God love him, he just listened to me, and he's like, what do you say to stuff like that, right? But he was into the paranormal to a point, so he was okay with it. But anyway, I get home and I let the dogs out, and there's no TV, no radio, there's no sound in the house. And I take out my phone and I go to send him a text, just say, hey, thanks for listening. And I hit the voice to text, and it beeps, and then it immediately beeps off, like right after, like split second. And I go to hit it again, and I look at the screen, and in that split second, it had recorded 2 words: Mom, good. And I said, well, I took that as my message. So I don't think I'm trying to put a square peg in a round hole here. For everything that was happening, the conversation I literally had, 20 to 30 minutes earlier, and everything that had been weighing on my mind, I needed that, and it was perfect, and that helped me get past that and kind of start and finish the grieving process, because I definitely got stuck.
Yeah. And you've written the 2 Ghost Crimes books. You've done a lot. Sounds like you've done a lot of research into law enforcement, first responders, and their involvement with the paranormal. It's a topic that has always fascinated me. And one, a lot of people tend to, I think a lot of people tend to give a lot of credence to law enforcement personnel. I mean, they're considered credible. And if they're having experiences, then people tend to listen. Military, first responders, medical personnel. law enforcement. How did you get involved in writing the ghost crime books and to going into the or pursuing this angle in researching the paranormal?
Well, I'd written a couple of books that were literally from my perspective. They were autobiographical. Here's what happened with regard to my metaphysical experiences. Here what happened with my, loss and my, adoption of dogs and what I learned about, training animals and things like that. And then I had compiled a book of adoption stories for a local rescue group, with pictures and the stories written by the pet parents, and all the donations were given to that group to continue to support rescue dogs. And I thought, wow, that's a neat idea. I should have people give me their stories and I can do a compilation. So I reached out, I put a posting out there, for um, law enforcement and military and healthcare workers, and nurses, doctors, all those, just anybody who, was around the passing of people and in their vocation. And when I got the stories back, I said, I can't just, there some of them were, hey, this happened. I'm just telling you, I'm not saying it's a ghost. I'm not trying to tell you what it is. I'm just telling you what happened. And others were, oh my God, thank God I was able to unload this because I wasn't able to tell anybody else. And others were very scared because it really shook the foundation of their belief system. And others, it sent them on a path of, now I have my own paranormal investigation group, that it just grabbed them and went that way. And there were so many different aspects to it. But there was one detective who was retired, and he was the most reluctant experiencer of the paranormal. And it was egregious. It was heinous. It was not good stuff. And, small children and, just stuff you don't want to read about, animals, things like that. And unfortunately, I really felt the trauma. I felt the pain. And I thought, I'm not going to just compile this, and I got to give this character and these folks a story because I want those characters to heal. And so that was my focus to do that. So I said, okay, let me come up with a detective. And, so I've got, sort of an X-Files, Mulder, Scully kind of, balance in there as well. But I made sure that I gave these folks, it's sort of a weekly group that meets, and it's sort of an AA, but for people with paranormal trauma. And they're able to meet and just share their story without judgment, and there's not always answers. But they're able to share it, and someone else says, yeah, I had something similar happen. And just that kind of helps you start, get past some of these horrific experiences. And sometimes it's just people passing, but, I thought about the nurses that shared stories with me, and I thought, but they see people pass so often. It's a constant part that has got to weigh on you. And then the grieving families, and these folks step up. These folks say, yes, I'm going to go to work and I'm going to take care of these people, and I'm going to be kind and empathetic to and sympathetic to these families, and at with their own energy and their own love. And it's like, we got to celebrate these people. We got to do something for them. And so that's kind of where it all came together. So the first book, Ghost Crimes, was all of the cases were from cases that were told to me or experiences I had. And then I wove them into a fictional narrative with that detective and some other supporting characters. And then the second book, I kind of used leftover stories that I had, that were shared to me as well. And then I created that support group. That way I could do the one-offs, and kind of give that little, it doesn't tie into the story, but it was a really cool paranormal experience for that individual.
Yeah, and I want to talk about, you said some of these law enforcement people are reluctant to share their stories, and that's certainly understandable, given, the importance of the work they do. And, I would have said 20 years ago, 30 years ago, people seem to be more reluctant. Do you even find that, like, law enforcement people, first responders, are more willing now that the subject's kind of opened up a bit to talk about these, or you still think they're pretty reluctant to do so?
I think, back in the day, nobody wanted to be the spooky Mulder, and you couldn't put, hey, I went and checked out this report and a ghost did it. That's not going to fly. No one's going to do that. And there is probably another explanation, so you just have to figure it out. But I think a lot of cold cases definitely, have a paranormal aspect to it, that they couldn't figure out. But These days, you're right. I think they're more open to it. It's like, okay, there's a ghost hunting show on every other channel now. You can't turn on the TV without, seeing one. So I think more, and like I said, there were people that were like, hey, I don't care if you make fun of me. It's not about that. It was about, I believe this, and this kind of cracks a little bit at the foundation of what I believe. And so, and it's not that they're like, and I can't believe it, but I've got to work to integrate that into my belief system. And because that foundation they have is very important to them. And some people are just like that. And some people are very grounded and very secular, and that's fine. So when something non-secular happens, they got to figure out the way to make it, to understand it, because they see it. And it's, the first step is, kind of saying this is what happened, and then kind of dissecting it from there. So it was more of that than anything when the stories were shared. But they were all very much like, I don't want my name attached. I don't want anything for this. Don't credit me. You asked for a story, I shared it. And then what was interesting though, they say, oh, and another thing happened. And then it got a little more comfortable, and then this happened to someone I know. And then they would share that story. And, to your point, I was on a podcast, it was I forget which one it was, but somebody asked me, how did you vet, the stories? And my response was just like yours. And I'm like, someone who leaves their house and says, I'm going to put myself in danger and at risk for strangers today. If they tell me a story, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and believe them. And, it's like, I didn't think to show me proof. That's not what this is about, come on. So,
Sure.
So when I say they're based on true stories, those stories that were told to me that they said they were true.
Yeah, sure. And that makes sense because, I'm kind of the same opinion as you. These people are doing important work. They're generally regarded, at least by some, in a positive light in the community, whether it's law enforcement. I mean, that I guess it depends on who you ask. Law enforcement, healthcare personnel, first responders, military. They tend to be listened to, and they tend to be considered credible if they have something to tell, or they have a story to tell. Let's talk about let's get into a little bit into law enforcement, because again, that's one that really fascinates me. Cops, law enforcement personnel come across a lot of bad stuff in their day-to-day work. Uh, what's kind of one that's really shocked you that's been shared with you?
So this one is, I like to tell this story because the police officer, she had been an officer for 7 years when this happened. But she was the type that she wasn't going to stop until she figured it out. And that was with everything in her life. Everything was figured out. Everything was completed. When she started something, she just kept going and going and going. But she was a very level-headed individual. But I could tell there was a forcedness in her personality. And you probably just gave in at some point if she was talking to you to get the answers. I like that. But she shared a story with me where she was got a call that there was somebody broke into a couple's house, and there was a man threatening a couple. And when she got there, the man that was threatening them, he was verbally threatening them, but it was a man who was in a hospital gown. And I guess the door had been open because he was able to just walk in the home. And she was able to subdue him very quickly. And he didn't put up a fight, but he kept pointing at the woman and he said, she killed me. He said it over and over, she killed me. And she's like, okay, let's get you. You're in a hospital gown. You've obviously not supposed to be here. You need help. She puts him in the back of the car and she goes to get another statement or finish up with a couple. And she comes back out and he's not in the car. The door's not open, but he is gone. And she's like, okay. So next step is she goes to the local hospital, and come to find out that that man, through description, had passed away in a coma that morning. And she's like, okay, so there's obviously a connection between this individual and this couple. So she goes back to the couple's house, and after a little bit of conversation, the woman breaks down in tears and says, yes, I knew him. And she tells the story that several months ago, she had been drinking, and they had been dating, and she went to pick him up that night. His car was in the shop or something. And when she got there, he said, hey, let me drive. You've already been drinking. And she said, I'm fine. And she ends up getting them in a very bad accident with a large tree off the side of the road, and he is knocked out. And she puts him in the driver's seat and then calls for help. And so the whole time he's in this coma and passed away now, the family and friends think that, he had caused the accident. And of course that wasn't the case. And she fessed up. And then, so him saying, she killed me, made sense.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you hear a lot of, I've heard just some of the shows. There's one on there about, and I think it's on Travel Channel. They're healthcare workers or law enforcement personnel or security personnel who have shared stories on there. Kind of similar stories where, they see someone. And they're even interacting with this person and come to find out that person has already passed on.
Yeah, I got a few stories, and it's kind of a variations on a theme, but it's a common story that I've heard and I think has been told, where there's a 5-car pileup, and someone responds, and a woman or a man is like, hey, it's over, come over here, somebody hurt in this car, and they they guide this person over there, or they drag them over there, and they look in the car and it's the same person that had dragged them there, and they turn around and they're gone. So like their spirit or their ghost had gotten out to bring them there. Similar story where there was a car that had, fallen off a cliff and tumbled down, and the woman is like, there's a baby in there, and it turns out that her baby's in there. She's dead in the car, but her baby's in there. And, but it was the same woman in the car that had, waved down somebody driving by to help them, after the accident happened. So I've heard that, like I said, variations on that quite a bit.
Yeah, it's those kinds of stories kind of blow your mind. Let's talk about these tragic accidents that happen. Somebody dies in a car accident, a plane crash, suddenly dies, and what's kind of your sense? Do you think some of these people know they're dead?
I don't. I think it's different for everyone, but I think if you truly didn't have any, a car accident if it's fast and you're thrown out of your body and you're able to see it, I guess it depends on your belief system. So if I were to get in a car accident tomorrow and suddenly I realized I was standing there looking at my, deceased physical body, I'd probably be like, oh, okay, it's over, and I'd probably be more interested with what's on this side now, because it's like I'll probably get a pretty clear read on what happened and be a little accepting. I would think I would be, because I expect that to happen. So if you're thrown out of the situation, and what's going to keep you from focusing on moving on, whatever that is, whether it's the white light or the family meeting you, what's going to keep you from doing that? Is it the shock that keeps you there, and you're like, no, I'm not dead, I just don't understand, and you can literally you mentally block out what you're seeing? Or maybe it's, oh wait, no, I got to get back to my family, I can't leave them yet. So I think there's a couple different reasons that would keep people from moving on. But the shock's got to be something that at least initially, if and I hope not long term, but I wonder sometimes about ghosts that linger. I bought a house where the the owner killed himself, and 4 months later I bought the house, and I didn't know he had committed suicide in the house. And I had a lot of crazy stuff happening, and I believed it was him, here for quite some time, and he didn't want to move on, and I don't know why, but I verbally told him, I said, hey, I don't know who's here, but you got to move on. This isn't your house anymore. But I wondered if, from his perspective, did he still see it as his house? Was his furniture still there? Because the activity got crazy whenever I made changes, whenever I changed out furniture, whenever I painted, any kind of home improvement, and it would stir up. And I was like, he doesn't like that I'm changing his house. And so that told me that there was a deep connection to it.
Yeah, and you hear that a lot. Somebody buys a property, turns it into a business. I knew a gentleman here in Ogden who had opened up a business, and he was renovating. Same thing, similar to what you said, painting, you know, setting up shelves, doing all sorts of renovating to the property. And he claims to have not even been a believer in the paranormal and ghosts until he moved into that building. And then he said once the renovation started and he started doing that, that's really when the activity picked up. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, you have to wonder if they're just kind of hanging around for some unfinished business, or if, you know, they just kind of they have an attachment to wherever they lived, to a business, whatever the case may be, if there's just some sort of attachment that they can't let go of.
Yeah, and to be in a suicidal state and to actually, go through and do that, you're in a different state of mind altogether, from, you know, reality or any kind of grounded or, I don't know, when I want to judge it, but so if you take that state of mind over on the other side, I can't even imagine, coupled with the fact that you're no longer physical. I don't even know how you reconcile all of that in a moment like that. I can't imagine.
Yeah, the one that's kind of been difficult for me to wrap my head around, because you will hear psychics or mediums say, "Well, this person died suddenly. They don't really know they're dead." That one is kind of to me is kind of hard to wrap my brain around, because I think, how can somebody? They said maybe they see their body lying there. Obviously, they, something has to click there. So that one is kind of hard to understand how they could not, you know, come to grips, or maybe it's just such a shock to them. Maybe they just haven't come to accept it. I don't know.
I think it goes back to the belief system. So there are people that their belief is when we're dead, we're dead. There's nothing else. We just die. And so for them to, maybe they can see themselves and they're like, I'm not dead because I'm still here. I don't know. And if something is so traumatic, I mean, people, we do it in our waking state. We block out traumatic events like they never happened, right? And we're able to function pretending those things didn't happen or are not happening, and we just get through it. So um, maybe it's that state, that they fall into.
Yeah, let's. I wanted to ask about getting back to the law enforcement. Any cases shared with you where um, perhaps the law enforcement person was not a believer, and then they had an experience that pretty much changed their paradigm and their belief system?
So it was definitely the detective, and that's who the main character is based on. And in the book, it's Detective Burke, which is obviously a made up name. But the the experiences he had, he tried to figure them out. He's like, okay, this isn't ghost, this isn't paranormal, and he was ended up paired up with a much younger detective, who you know didn't have any experiences, but he was cut of the same cloth. And there's a line in the book where he says, because he's starting to see these things that he can't explain. And I'll share the story that kind of turned the corner for him. But when he said, hey, this is happening, these crazy things are happening, we have to figure it out because our normal tools aren't going to work in this case. And the other detective says, these people kill people, these aren't ghost crimes. We got to figure out, the physical reason for this. But he had gone to a furniture store, and at the woman who owned the furniture store, she was closed for the day to do inventory, but she reported an intruder. And so they went in there, and she's like, well, he's gone. But the doors had been locked, both front and back. So they couldn't figure out, how the intruder was in and then they were gone. And she said, well, I have video. And so they went and pulled the video, and sure enough, there's a man, in a black coat with a black hat, and he's got super white hair, older gentleman, and he's in the furniture store. So they watch him, and he literally walks through a wall and goes through the wall and disappears. And they're like, okay, this is crazy. So they go next door, to see what's there, trying to figure this out. And it's a donation collection spot for clothing and other things people can drop off. And as they're talking to the worker, they can see behind the counter in a box, there's a black coat and the same hat that the man had been wearing. and they kind of look at it, and it's got white hairs on it, and it had just been dropped off that morning, because they had put that person, they'd had that person's funeral. The family went back to the house, cleaned out the house, and made the donations. So that was the first turning point, because he had physical evidence of someone being there, walking through a wall. He found the clothing on the other side, and it kind of checked all the boxes. And he was like, whoa. And there's actually a lot more to that story in the book, as it was told to me. And that just sort of opened the door. So what was tough for him was that there was also a satanic cult case that he had worked on for many, many years. And it was just a horrific case. And he sort of like was in and out of it because they eluded him, and they didn't know it was a satanic cult. They're very good at covering up their tracks, but they were here in a rural part of Florida, where he worked actually. And so I kind of weave that into the story as well. So he would go from that ghost experience that I just described to just people being satanic and doing awful things to other people and to animals. And so things would make sense, and then they wouldn't, and then they would make sense, and then they wouldn't. And he didn't live a healthy lifestyle. He had lost his love of his life at an early age, and he never recovered from that. He's very overweight, drank excessively. That's, sort of your typical, that stereotypical detective that you see sometimes in TV shows like that. But he was very dedicated and very good at what he did. But he was a reluctant experiencer of the paranormal, and those are his words.
Yeah. How about stories that were shared with you? Were there any, ghosts, apparitions, anything like that were reported to you where they did harm to the living?
Yeah. So, oh my. And again, I really, and it's funny, one of my reviews, somebody gave me a bad review because I wrote about children and animals being harmed. And I said, do you think it was easy for me to write about it? It's like, but I had to tell the story, right? So, I mean, I literally, my eyes were watering as I'm typing this stuff. And it's like, but it's a story. I had to get it out there, So, but anyway, there was a EMT and his partner showed up to a house where a woman had called and said that her son, was injured, which was an understatement. So they show up, and the little girl, the family meets him at the door, and it's, they can hear just loud screaming from the mother, crying from the son. The little girl drags them to a bedroom, and they walk in, and literally there is a young boy, and he's pinned against the wall about 10 feet off the ground, by an unseen force. He's pinned there, but there's nothing holding him there. But he's choking. So in his mind, there was an unseen force with a hand around his neck. His arm's broken, so it's sort of like dangling like a noodle off the side. He's trying to scream, through being choked. The mother is just helpless, screaming from beneath. And the partner runs away, can't take it. And something told him to grab his cross, his gold cross, off his chain off his neck. He grabs it, he runs over, and he puts it on the child, and immediately he just falls to the ground, and it's over. And so he helps him as best he can. He obviously calls an ambulance. They take him away. So he takes the rest of the day off because he didn't know what to make of that. So he goes home, and he goes to bed that night. He kind of collapses out of fatigue, and he has a dream that he's being held up on his bedroom wall by an unseen force, and they're choking him. And this unseen force has this demonic sounding voice and says, you don't have a cross to save you this time, because he had left the cross at the scene with the boy. And he woke up from the nightmare on the floor, having fallen from the wall outside of his bed to the right of his bed. And wow. Yeah, and I have him share that story on one of the support groups. And I have one of the other people say, well, what'd you do next? And he said, I went and got another cross. And I was able to get some levity in there for, again, when you have a child being injured, you got to be super careful. That and animals for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one thing I never like to see in a horror type movie is a child getting hurt, even if it is just a movie. It's just, or yeah, animals, dogs. It's just difficult to see.
It is
difficult to watch.
It is. I'm at the point where I don't even watch dog movies. If it's a dog movie, I'm like, I know at some point something's going to happen. I just don't even go down that road anymore. It's like, no, can't do it.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about, because you've also got a lot of stories from people in the medical field who've shared stories, whether they're nurses, doctors, healthcare workers, whatnot. What's a few of the surprising stories that have been shared with you?
Wow, this is another one that I had to include in Ghost Crimes too, because it just gave me goosebumps when I heard it. But so there was a pretty big pile up on an interstate somewhere. I forget the city. It was somewhere up north, and many people did not survive that. But they were brought in. They tried to save them. So people were unfortunately put in rooms together that normally they wouldn't pair them up, and in their condition. But it was a crazy night at the hospital. They were short staffed. So a nurse goes into a room to check on these patients, and both of these patients had severe injuries. Neither of them were expected to make it, unfortunately, but they were doing everything they could. They were post surgery, but they had to put them back in their rooms because of the amount of people that were involved in this situation. So she goes to the bed closest to the door, and it's freezing, just freezing around here. And she's thinking there's something wrong with the air conditioning, and she made a mental note to go check it. And the man is very, very, very upset, and he keeps pointing up at the ceiling. And she's like, are you okay? And he's like, there's a demon, and he's on the ceiling, and he's here to take me. He's taking me to hell for what I've done. And she had no idea what that meant. She looked up, she didn't see anything, and she tried to relax him. And she said she got him calmed down. And then she went to the other patient, and as she goes to the other side of the room, like 15 degrees warmer. She's like, whoa, okay, something's obviously off with the air conditioning here. And the man is very, he's not doing well, but he's smiling. And she's like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah. And he's looking at the ceiling, and she kind of looks at the ceiling. She doesn't see anything. And she asks, what, do you see something? And he's like, yeah. He goes, there's an angel here for me. I'm okay. And she found out later he was, a man of faith. But so anyway, both of them did end up passing. So a couple months go by, and there's a woman admitted into the room, and she calls for help. So she goes into the room, and she's in the bed closest to the door, and she's like, "Can I help you?" And she's like, I'm not in the right place." And she checks the charts, and she said, "No, this is your room. You're in the right place." And she's like, "No. I'm in the wrong bed. I'm supposed to be in the one with the angel." And she points to the other bed on the other side of the room.
Wow.
And she ended up passing. And it was just that whole night came back to her. And that's what she said. She said it was the everything came back and just came full circle. It was like she had half a story, and then it was completed in that moment. And she just did not know what to make of it. And she and she didn't have any problem. She's told everybody she knows. She's like, listen to this, because she's trying to figure it out. So she didn't care what people thought. But yeah, that still gives me goosebumps.
Gare, how about people talking, healthcare people, medical workers, nurses talking about when people are in that transition phase or they're just passing? Any stories about them seeing apparitions of people shortly after their passing?
So not after their pass. So I had a few stories conveyed, and it was pretty much a similar theme that the family was there, when they said, hey, you need to come to the hospital. We're expecting the last moments to be today. So the family was around, and they're sort of waiting it out, unfortunately. And she said there were many cases where they would suddenly have a look of peace, and they would look off to the side, and they would say, so and so is here, or they would bring up so and so. It's okay, so and so is going to take care of me, or something like that, leading them to believe that they were seeing them. And to me, that's okay. That would make me feel good hearing that a loved one is there to bring them over to the other side. But people that don't have that thought process with the paranormal or passing over, it could be sad for them. They think, oh, there's dementia, there's Alzheimer's, they're imagining things because it's their last moments. And and I'm not saying they're wrong at all, because we don't know what's happened, right? None of us know. We're all just trying to figure it out. But I think for selfish reasons, I choose to believe that the loved ones are there to make that transition, a little a little easier. And God, what a transition that is.
Yeah, and you do hear, I've heard several stories of people, and some people that I know well who have had a family member pass on that has experienced that as well. And you've also heard now I know you've looked into the near-death experience. There's also the shared death experience phenomena where people have claimed to have shared an experience with a family member as they're passing on. So that's kind of an interesting one as well. I don't know if you've kind of heard of that or have read much about the shared death experience.
No, I didn't have anyone share that. It's interesting. I'll share. I had again, 53 years old, so I had a colonoscopy earlier this year. Yay! And I was a little worried, only because I don't do well with anesthesia. I actually woke up on the operating table, because I think I have anxiety about it, and I actually woke up because I think I burn through it, so to speak. It's like and they'll tell me they really had to use a lot to keep me under, kind of thing. And I'm like, okay, but I was nervous going in, and just because of the aging process, and of course, what are they going to find? That whole thing. I was kind of being a warrior, and anyway, so I remember when they put me out, and the next thing I know, I wake up, and there's a nurse, and she's touching me, and she's saying, Garrett's time to time to wake up, come back to us. And there's another nurse at the end of the bed, and she's kind of typing stuff in this little mobile desk with a laptop. And this beautiful nurse, just gorgeous nurse. And I said, and she's like, "How you doing?" And I said, "I'm doing good." And of course I'm kind of groggy, but I'm like, I feel really good. And I'm like, yeah, I feel good. And she's like, okay. She goes, well, Stephanie's gonna take it from here. And I said, okay, thanks. And she walks off, and as if on cue, when she walks away, Stephanie, the nurse, walks over. And I look at her name tag, it says Stephanie, and I said, wow. I said, she was really nice. And she's like, who? I said, that nurse that was just here. She goes, there's no other nurse here. And I go, oh, come on. And of course, I call my brothers and my friends, and they're like, of course you saw ghosts. I'm like, I swear to you that happened. But in hindsight, I was like, yeah, I was worried. And I just wonder if that was something to help me come out of it, feeling good about it. I don't know. But if it was a hallucination from being under, which I know most people will go to that, again, it was choreographed very well with the living person there. So again, I'm not saying 100% I saw a ghost, but I'm telling you what I saw, and I felt her touch my arm. But again, when you're coming out of that anesthesia, I guess you can see all kinds of wonderful things, right? Again, a gorgeous nurse, very helpful and friendly. Everything's fine, see you later, kind of thing. So
right. Now, I want to talk about near-death experience because you've delved into that, I know, as well. What have you kind of taken away? What have been your takeaways from researching and looking into the near-death experience phenomena?
So let me back up a little bit. So from a metaphysical perspective and my studies, and I've seen people channel spirit guides and entities from the other side, and they tell you that once you get to the other side, and they refer to it as the astral plane, it's that plane right next to ours, and that's where the ghosts are, and it's a very thin veil between us, but that's where they are, and that's where we go. We can go on our sleep, but that's where people go when they pass away. And if they pass away and come back, then they'll retain some of that memory. And on the astral plane, thought is created instantly. So if you pass away, my understanding is when or if you realize you're passed away, you create your expectation. So if you believe you're bad and you're, of a certain religion and you're going to hell, you'll bring back that horrific, memory of what you created and what you experienced. And same thing, you saw loved ones. That's a common, because most people, are into that. The white light, that's all we hear about is the white light. And of course, that's comforting. It's warm, it's glowing, and you say, hey, go there. But then someone says, hey, it's not your time. And then you go back. And I think that's the point where, so I think you're creating what your expectation, but I think the spirit guide or the loved ones are like, yeah, it's not your time. And the lucky ones, I think, will get a message, when they come back with a renewed purpose or vigor towards life, and that's what I'd like to really, I thought about doing a book, again, kind of a compilation thing of that, because I wanted to group it into, did it happen at a point in your life where you needed a new direction, where you needed some new guidance or purpose, and you needed to understand that life was or is, valuable, and it's nothing to be taken for granted, and time is limited, kind of thing. And I really wanted to focus on that, in the compilations. And I'm not saying I won't do it, but a few projects, ahead of that right now. But that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, there is some interesting reoccurring themes with near-death experiences too, though, isn't there?
Well, just the white light, the loved ones that they see. Some people say it's complete blackness. It's just black, and they see nothing. And if you don't believe you see anything, then there's that. And I have heard cases where, and again, in reading a lot of books of people that were regressed back into the moments that they passed away. And again, it's just moments, but time doesn't exist in the astral. So there can be a whole lot of stuff happening. But they actually retain the denseness, I guess is the best word, because on the astral plane of the other side, their vibration is much higher. So for us to interact or see them, they either have to lower their vibration or we have to raise our vibration, or both. Well, I don't think a vibration of someone who is dead or thinks they're dead or realizes they're dead is going to be high. I think that's going to drop as dense as it possibly can. And so the loved ones or the spirit guides can't get to them. So they aren't able to kind of see what's in front of them, or the folks that are trying to help them on the other side. But I can't imagine that there isn't some sort of system set up. I mean, passing out of a physical body, it's got to be traumatic, because by design, we don't remember being born. So both those occurrences have to be pretty traumatic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would think that there's a system set up, but I think 70, 80 years on the planet, our belief system, again, if you're on the astral and your thought creates reality like that, and what you expect to see, yeah, who knows? I mean, so everybody's saying, oh no, this happens when you pass over. I said, I think it's different for everybody. That's kind of where I land on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. There does seem to be in some of the research some common themes, things like life reviews and such. But yeah, there is some different nuances to people's experiences. Absolutely. I just find it interesting that there seems to be some common themes that, for people who've had experiences from different backgrounds, religions, cultures, that sort of thing. There have been some common themes about what people have reported with near-death experiences.
Well, life review to me is probably the biggest gift you could possibly get. So to me, that's, along the same lines as reincarnation. So you tap into a past life where, you had a habit of, having a certain behavior, you carry that behavior into this life, and it's not serving you. It's keeping you from having a relationship, it's keeping you from keeping a job, and you realize that that's something you brought over and you need to, make changes. You're able to see it objectively because another you had it, kind of thing, but you're able to see it play out in a negative way and realize. And some people don't realize, they're that way, kind of thing. And so I think, so if you were to pass over and someone says, hey, let's look what you did a few years ago and let's see how that action or inaction set these things into motion, and set you up in a life that you're not happy with. And so you have time to make changes. So that's an incredible gift. I mean, if I were to have a near death and brought back, something like that, I would overanalyze the crap out of it and make my life better for it.
Yeah, you would hope so. If you had that kind of experience, that you would come back, kind of with a new vigor for life, perhaps. A lot of people come back and say they no longer fear death. You will hear people say, I fear the process of dying, but I don't fear death itself, because they now have they have reassurance that there's something beyond this realm, I think.
So, and again, in my readings, channeled information from spirit guides, or spirits or souls from the other side that have passed away. My understanding that there's a blueprint for our life. There's a blueprint of what we're doing, and there's exit points, and you can take them or not take them, depending on what you've achieved and at what point you want to leave. But my understanding is, in a lot of cases, the other side knows. It's not a surprise to them you got in that car accident. They can see down the road 100 yards, for us. And my understanding is that we are taken out of our physical body when those traumatic events happen. So, you know, I couldn't imagine. I think drowning or being on fire would be the worst ways to pass. But I couldn't imagine experiencing that because it goes on for some time before, you know, the physical body goes away, kind of thing. So I'd hate for that. But I kind of like to think that that's true, that I would be out of my body at that point, and it's just the physical body passing away.
Right. Yeah, I want to get back to you talked about moving into the haunted house. I think you talked about it in one of your books. Uh, Talk a little bit about that process and how that kind of played out, and did the activity eventually cease?
Yeah. So I didn't know that this individual had committed suicide in the house. And in Florida, it's not a law that it has to be disclosed. It's ethical to do so, but it's not lawful that you have to do it, unfortunately.
Doesn't help sell houses though.
Well, what's funny is when I looked at the house the first time, it was sold as is. The owner had passed away, I heard. His wife had already moved up north. They had been divorced for about 4 months, where they were in the process of getting divorced. And I remember looking at the house because it had a lot of potential, but the carpets were dirty and the pool was green, and it was as is. And I said, well, I can't even see the bottom of the pool. I can't tell if this thing is, you know, in good shape. And I remember the front bedroom, the carpet was black, just black. And I said, like someone spilled oil. And I made an offer, you know, and they came back and said, well, they're going to go with another offer. Well, a couple weeks later, they said, hey, are you still interested? And I came back. Well, they had changed out the carpet, cleaned the pool, and it was a much different house. And, you know, come to find out that was not oil that was on the carpet in that front bedroom. And so the house is completely empty. I mean, there were no ceiling fans. There were no blinds. They had taken everything out of this house. And I was like, okay. So a buddy of mine got together and we put up blinds and ceiling fans. And I went to Home Depot and I came back and he's laying on the floor because he had a bad back. He was taking a break, and I said, "You okay?" And he kind of turned and looked at me. He's like, "Where have you been?" He goes, How did you get through the front door?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I went to Home Depot." And he said, "Who have I been talking to then?" But he had been talking to someone in the front bedroom. He thought it was me working in the front bedroom. And I said, "Well, what were they asking you?" And he said, "They were asking me what I was doing." And I told him, "I'm hanging blinds." And he said, "Why are you hanging blinds?" He said, "Because you told me to." He said it was just really weird questions, and he thought it was me. And he looks at his tool belt and his hammer's gone. And again, there's nothing in this house. There is nothing. There's nowhere for anything to hide. And for weeks on out, you know, things just went missing constantly. But, you know, one night I'm at the computer and again, I didn't have the ceiling fan on. It was a cool night, didn't have the window open, and the air conditioner wasn't on. And the blinds just like somebody smacked them, like, you know, just 5 feet from me. My dog jumps up and I'm like, okay, there's something in here, obviously. So come to find out that this individual killed himself in the front bedroom, but there was more to it. When they found him, there was an altar of sorts set up, and there was a lot of crazy stuff, a lot of animal parts and candles and things like that, sort of voodoo or Santeria or something like that. And he was into something crazy. And it was all about the loss of his life or his wife, you know, leaving him and things like that. And I had a horrific experience with I can only call it a demon. I go to bed, and so I'm dealing with the ghost. I'm thinking, okay, it's the former owner. It's parlor tricks, right? He's hiding keys, you know, stuff like that. I'm like, whatever. I got a psychic friend, so he's coming over, and we're sea salt and holy water and doing the whole deal, you know, trying to go to the light. You know, you're done. You know, it's over. And so I go to bed one night, and I was super restless, super annoyed, and I couldn't get to sleep. And I had my shirt off, and I'm on my side, and I felt two fingers push into my rib cage, and they pushed with such force that I rocked. And I turned over, and as I turned over, and again, I'm wide awake, instantly into sleep paralysis. I just freeze. And I can't turn my head. I can't even move my eyes, but I can see that there's like a yellow eyes, burnt face, this horrific looking entity is just slowly coming into my face. And it kind of moves over in front of me where I can see it. And it's almost studying me. Like it was the weirdest. And my heart is pounding in my chest. And he's got like this wiry whiskers. And one of them touched my chin. And in that touch, I was able to move again. And just then it just ran out of my room, and all of the dogs jumped out of bed and chased this thing to the front bedroom. I hear the door slam to the front bedroom. I run out, and I can see the dogs are all standing at, I had 3 dogs at the time, and they're at the door just barking at this closed door trying to get in. And I said, okay, so call Psychic 2 in. Like, I need some help here. And so what was determined was that he had conjured something. He had brought something into the house through whatever he was doing in that front bedroom with his magic. And it was pretty nasty. And so I was able to call in, and there's a modern day shaman. His name's Michael Robichaud. And I was able to have him come in and remotely cleanse the house and finally remove him, or remove it. And to be honest with you, it took a lot longer for, I think, the homeowner to leave. But again, you know, he'd only get upset. He'd knock on the window, or, you know, kind of thing. It was just minor stuff, so I didn't think much of it. But eventually he did go away, because I just kept encouraging him to go to the light, go to a loved one, go on. You know, you don't live here anymore. Go away, kind of thing. So yeah, you talk about an apparition that was, yeah, it hasn't happened since, thank God. But I keep a very clean home. You know, I still have my sea salt and holy water. But things still follow me home. I still have, you know, they get through the barrier somehow. I don't know how. And then I just have to go through the cleansing process again. But it's, you know, towels being thrown across the room. There was a Santa I had, a little 6-inch Santa that was a tree topper, and I had it down beneath the tree, and it would be put in the middle of the room every couple of hours.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, you know, the parlor tricks are fun, but it's just annoying.
It's like a prankster kind of thing. So you're still in the same house, is that correct?
I am, yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I think if some people would have had that experience, Gare, they probably would have hightailed it out of there. And
you know, well, if I hadn't had all the metaphysical and paranormal experiences prior to that, I bought the house in 1999. So I'd kind of gone through, you know, some experiences for sure. But, you know, I was not bright. I had a Ouija board that I thought was fun to play with in the house. And I had an experience with that where I finally realized that, you know, it's a portal. It can bring stuff in. What am I doing? You know, why am I adding more to it? Because there was one day where I lifted the lid off of it. And again, the dogs chased something unseen down the hallway. Like something had jumped out of the box, and my buddy was there, and I said, "What did you just see?" And he was like, "It kind of seemed like they were chasing something after you took the lid off the box." I said, "Okay, as long as you saw what I just saw." So again, I'm like, this is not positive. So he used to come over every day when he got off work, and he'd meet at my house, and the gym was around the corner. So we go to the gym, and we're driving to the gym, and we stop at one of those drop-offs where you can do donations, but it's the really small cutout that can only fit certain things. And I dropped the Ouija board there, and I'm thinking, some poor family is going to get this Ouija board. What am I doing? Like, I should, you know, get rid of it. So anyway, I drop it off. Swear to God, hand to God, the next day I come home and I go, and the Ouija board is back in my drawer in my dresser. I open the dresser and the board is back. And I put it on the dining room table and I just stare at it. My buddy comes over, walks in and goes, "Didn't we drop that off yesterday?" And I said, "Yeah." So, fire. So we go in the backyard, dig a hole, burn it, and it was black. Oh my God, it was horrific. I was like, what is happening here? And never came back after that.
Well, that's good. It never returned. Just wanted to ask, one, where can people, Amazon's obviously one of them. Where else can people find your work, your books, more about you and what you do?
Sure. All my books are available on Kindle and in paperback through Amazon.com. They're also available on Audible.com in the Audible format. You can visit me at my website, which is GareAllen.com, and you can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram at Gare Allen, GareAllen.
Okay, great. Well, hey, Gare, I appreciate you joining me. Some really, really interesting stuff, intriguing stuff, a little bit spooky stuff too there. So really appreciate you spending the time talking with me, and best of luck in all your future travels and endeavors.
Well, Thank you, Curry, and congratulations on your podcast. And again, as a retired Air Force, thank you for your service.
All right. Thank you. Have a great night, Gare.
You too.